Premanande. Reading from Srila Prabhupada, Lilamrita. Can anyone tell me what Lilamrita means? Top of the class. Nectarian pastimes. So this is the last instruction, and the marker has fallen out of place. I'll just read from here, unless anybody knows where it is. Srila Prabhupada's life had been dedicated to spreading the holy name to every town and village, and for a month he had been surrounding himself with the holy name. For its passing away, he especially wanted to fill the room with devotees chanting Hare Krishna, and Krishna fulfilled that wish. Srila Prabhupada therefore departed under the most favourable circumstances possible in the most sacred place, Vrindavan, surrounded by Vaishnavas chanting the holy name. Now, Prabhupada here is such an elevated soul that he can pass away in any situation, and it's auspicious. Sometimes the spiritual master is known as, this is mentioned in the Bhagavatam, that spiritual master is known as Prabhupada or Vishnupad or Tirthapad. Tirthapad means that one who creates holy places by his very presence. And Prabhupada was such a person. But still he was showing the devotees this is an ideal way to leave your body in the holy place of Vrindavan, surrounded by devotees chanting Hare Krishna. And it's such a favourable atmosphere for leaving the body. The ideal spiritual teacher, Acharya, always acts in such a way that others may follow his example. As Srimad Bhagavatam states, these great souls who cross over the ocean of birth and death by taking shelter of the boat of the lotus feet of Krishna miraculously leave the boat on this side for others to use. Srila Prabhupada's disappearance by his perfect example affords all conditioned souls the means for meeting the greatest of all dangers. An auspicious death is not merely a matter of psychological adjustment, so that one may die without regret or without becoming unduly upset. The real point is that at the time of death, the soul must leave the body and take its next birth. Only the Krishna-conscious soul can leave this world of birth and death and attain an eternal blissful life in the spiritual world. Therefore, one's life is tested at death. Death means the soul cannot stand to live in the body anymore. Whatever the material cause may be, the situation has become unbearable for the soul, and leaving the body causes great distress. The Shastras therefore advise us to get free from the cycle of repeated birth and death. Meeting an inauspicious death and being dragged down to a lower birth is the most fearful thing for the living being. So fearful is it that we may try to ignore death altogether. Death is painful because the eternal spirit soul is placed in a most unnatural situation. Though the soul is eternal and should not have to die, he is forced to die because of his connection with the material body. At death, the eternal soul is forced to leave the body for a destination he knows not. Thus he is full of fear and suffering. The pain and fear is usually overwhelming, and one thinks only of material attachments or bodily pain. Therefore, King Kulashekar prayed, and Prabhupada often quoted, "Please let me pass away, not in some prolonged contemplation of my bodily death, but just while I am chanting Hare Krishna. If I can meditate on you and then pass from this body, that will be perfection." So Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 2, entitled Hiranyakashipu, King of the Demons, text number 15. Kechit, Kanitrair, Bibidu, Kechit, Kanitrair, Bibidu, Setu, Prakara, Gopuran, Setu, Prakara, Gopuran, Ajivyamj, Chitchidur, Vrikshan, Ajivyamj, Chitchidur, Vrikshan, Kechit, Parashu, Panaya, Kechit, Parashu, Panaya, Pradahan, Sharanani, Eke, Pradahan, Sharananyeke, Prajanam, Jwalito Mukai, Prajanam, Jwalito Mukai, Kechit, Kanitrair, Bibidu, Titu Prakara Gopuran, Ajivyam Chichidur Vrikshan, Kechit Parashu Panaya, Pradahan Sarananyeke, Prajanan Jwalitol Mukai, Kechit Kanitrar Bibidu, Titu Prakara Gopuran, Ajivyam Chichidur Vrikshan, Kechit Parashupanaya, Pradan Charananyeke, Prajanam Jwalitol Mukai. Chant. Please. Some of the demons, can you try with digging instruments? Bibidu broke to pieces. Setu bridges. Prakara protective walls, Gopuran, city gates, Ajivyan, source of livelihood, Chichidu, cut down, Vrikshan, trees, Kechit, some, Parashupanaya, taking axes in hand, Pradahan, burn down, Charanani, dwellings, Eke, other demons, Prajanam, of the citizens, Dwalita, blazing, Unmulkai, so Ulmukai, with firebrands. Translation: some of the demons took digging instruments and broke down the bridges, the protective walls, and the gates, the gopuras, of the cities. Some took axes and began cutting the important trees that produced mango, jackfruit, and other sources of food. Some of the demons took firebrands and set fire to the residential quarters of the citizens. Please repeat: some of the demons took digging instruments and broke down the bridges, the protective walls and gates, gopuras, of the cities. Some took axes and began cutting the important trees that produced mango, jackfruit, and other sources of food. Some of the demons took firebrands and set fire to the residential quarters of the citizens. So Prabhupada's purport: the cutting of trees is generally prohibited. In particular, trees that produce nice fruit for the maintenance of human society should not be cut. In different countries, there are different types of fruit trees. In India, the mango and jackfruit tree are prominent, and in other places there are mango trees, jackfruit trees, coconut trees, and berry trees. Any tree that produces nice fruit for the maintenance of the people should not be cut at all. This is a Shastric injunction. Om Gyanantamrandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmalitam Yana Tasmai Shigurave Namaha Mutam Karoti Vachalam Bhagam Lagate Garam Yakripatamaham Vande Shigaram Dinitaranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Some of the demons took digging instruments and broke down the bridges, the protective walls, and the gates, gopuras, of the cities. Some took axes and began cutting the important trees that produced mango, jackfruit, and other sources of food. Some of the demons took firebrands and set fire to the residential quarters of the citizens. So we can see here although they're demons, they're not completely out of control fools. They're very systematically and strategically trying to disrupt the civilization of the Varnashram system. So as mentioned previously, this the purpose of the demons doing this was because Hiranyakashipu considered Vishnu and the followers of Vishnu to be his sworn enemies. So in particular, when Hiranyaksha was killed by Lord Vishnu in the form of the boar, Varaharupa, then Hiranyakashipu's enmity simply increased. And being the sworn enemy of Vishnu, of course, this is a pastime, just like we were talking about Lilamrita earlier on. This is also Lilamrita, is the nectar of the Lord's pastimes, because these two demons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, are actually great devotees playing a part, taking part in the pastime of the Lord. So the Lord has these pastimes in the material world and has pastimes in the spiritual world. And sometimes the Lord comes to the material world to display those pastimes to attract the devotees back Paritranaya sadunam vinashaya chaduskatam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. So when the Lord appears, sambhavami yuge yuge, age after age, millennium after millennium, he does generally for three purposes. One is to protect the devotees and to annihilate the miscreants and to re-establish the principles of Dharma, Dhamma Samstapanartaya, to re-establish. So we see here that the demons are trying to frustrate the followers of Varnashram Dharma from performing their Dharma or their duties. And this Varnashram Dharma are duties in relation to the Supreme Lord, so that one can gradually be elevated beyond the material conditioning and be extricated from the material world. So in this Varnashram system, generally one has an occupation which they particularly are psycho and physically connected to, which is suitable for their nature. Within ISKCON, actually, we find ourselves in a situation where we do so many things which might not be according to our physical nature. If everyone was to act according to their Dharma, and we probably wouldn't have anybody on the altar. There'd be so many things we wouldn't be able to do. And Prabhupada could never have even started this movement. No, when he came to the West, then he was seeing that the world was, Western world in particular, was predominantly affected by the lower modes, namely passion and ignorance. And he was thinking, he was praying to the Lord, my dear Lord, you must have some reason to bring me here. I don't know why you brought me here, but I'm simply your servant, so I'm a puppet in your hands, make me dance as you like. And also in that same song or bhajan poem that Prabhupada wrote, he said that the holy name of Gauranga would be heard in every town and village. So just as we're faithfully serving the deity, then the holy name of the Lord, Harinam, this is the Dharma for the age. So there may be so many other duties to perform, but the purpose of the Hare Krishna movement, as the name would suggest, is to create some movement of the chanting of Hare Krishna. So that we don't just keep it to ourselves. If we keep it to ourselves, it's not a movement, is it? It's a stagnant. There may be some internal movement, but the interesting thing is when in spiritual life, the more you give, the more you have. So when we give Krishna consciousness to others, then we don't become depleted. Our Krishna consciousness increases. Anything in the material world, if you give it, then you have less. And therefore, people are greedy because they don't want less, they want more. And no matter how much you get, you'll never have enough. So there's simply, the more we get, the more we increase, we artificially increase our bodily demands and our artificial standard of living. But we only have a certain capacity. It's like we have a certain size of stomach. So no matter how rich you are, you can only still eat a certain amount. It's not that you can eat your favourite food all day and it won't affect you. We're limited by this body. So there's various activities that we can engage in Krishna consciousness, and we're not restricted to simply one type of activity. So this is actually such a great freedom. The devotees can realize we're actually not stuck to one particular activity. Sometimes a devotee may be doing one service and then they may be doing another one. And quite often, as Prabhupada says, we have to do the needful. So quite often the needful means that we're jumping in the deep end. We're thrown in the deep end doing things that we never imagined we would do. And that's quite a challenge. But Krishna empowers us to rise to that challenge, and we learn so many things. One thing, when I visited the temple at first, many years ago, then I was just, there's a couple of things that were quite prominent in my mind, is that everyone just seemed so talented, and they seemed so full of energy, and it seems like devotees could do anything that they put their mind to. And I think because they believe that if they just depend on Krishna, Krishna is the actual doer, then Krishna empowers them. And also because they, if a devotee is not attached to the result, then they can put full effort in, and whatever the result is, then that may be there or it may not be there, but put full effort in. Another thing which struck me was that I couldn't tell what age the devotees were. I couldn't tell whether they were 20, 30 or 40-year-old. I don't think there was anybody above that age at that time. It was quite a new movement. And considering that they were not indulging in all the usual things which people indulge in, they were following these 4 vows: no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling, no meat eating. And they were chanting for 2 hours a day before they do anything, even before most people got up out of their bed. Like today, the devotees here, they've been in the temple since 4:30. Some devotees have been up since 3 or 4 in the morning. So by the time most people were just getting up and getting ready to go to work, then the devotees have practically put in a day already. But it's funny because sometimes people, they don't see devotees as being productive. They think, oh, you're just chanting Hare Krishna and you're just lazy fellows. You don't do anything. You just wander about the street in your bed sheets chanting some foreign sound. So sometimes they might think like that. And then others, they're attracted. They don't know they don't know why they're attracted, but they're attracted to it. And in their minds, you can see that they want to be part of that. They can see that the devotees are free. We may not think we're so free because we're conscious of our own attachments, etc., but we're certainly a lot more freer than most people because we have been able to give up some things which other people think impossible and which we also thought was impossible. And it's made possible because of yukta vairagya. We can engage so many things in Krishna's service and we give up the attachment of doing them for ourselves. And some things we do give up. We can't go down to the butcher's in the pub and have a steak pie and a pint of beer in Krishna's service. You know, some things are just not allowed. It's because it's detrimental to ourselves and it's detrimental to other living entities. So sometimes people are envious of the fact that devotees, they seem to have an easier life. Now, if you ask a devotee, they generally don't think they have an easy life because we actually have so many challenges. And as we were speaking about earlier on in the Prabhupada Lilamrita, our main challenge is that we're preparing for leaving this body. Now, we don't know whether it'll be today, tomorrow, 10 years, 40 years' time, but we're preparing for that. So our challenge is that we're trying to overcome our attachments to this material world and learn how to engage in devotional service. So giving up for devotee doesn't mean to say just like dry abnegation, just actually stopping activity. Devotees are not inactive, but learning how to engage everything for Krishna's pleasure. Prabhupada said that Krishna consciousness is so simple that you miss it. And the simple thing is that to remember that Krishna is actually the enjoyer, and we're part and parcel of Krishna. And we enjoy when we put Krishna in the center. If we try to enjoy separate from Krishna, then that's like the hand trying to enjoy separately from the stomach. So you can try it, a little experiment if you like. If you do, you probably think you're nuts, but if you go to breakfast this morning and somebody puts out a plate of porridge and then your hand decides to go and strike, thinking the stomach gets everything, I'm not going to feed the stomach today, I'm going to have it all. So the hand just goes like this in the porridge. I'm just going to absorb this myself and taste it and enjoy it in the stomach. It can paddle its own canoe, it's not getting anything. It gets all the stuff. I'm just serving all the time and I get nothing. So then what's going to happen after a little while, the hand is going to get weak and weak and weak, and then it won't even be able to lift the porridge after some time. So this is us, that we disconnect ourselves from the source, from that which we're eternally connected with, and we're forgetting, in our rebellious nature, we're forgetting that the Ishvara Parama Krishna, Satchit Ananda Vigraha, Anadir Adir Govinda, Sarva Karana Karanam, that Krishna is the Sarva Karana Karanam of all causes. He is the cause. In other words, he is the cause of all causes. He's Anadir Adir Govinda. He's the origin of all. Ishvara Parama Krishna. He is the supreme controller. We all have some ability to control, but our ability to control is quite minuscule, actually. Have you ever experienced, ask someone to do something, they don't do it? Have you ever experienced that, anybody? Does that mean that we don't have control over them, doesn't it? I remember my young sister, she was about 6 years old at the time, and my older sister, who was probably about 12 years older than her, who was trying to tell her what to do, and she said, "You're not the boss of me." So at such an age, it's just natural that people don't want to be governed by another person. Independence is there. It's carrying on from our previous lives. But when we come to Krishna consciousness, we have an opportunity to realize. Self-realization means to realize what we are, which was eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge, and to realize what we're not. So this is also mentioned in the Ishvara Upanishad, to know the path of knowledge and nescience or ignorance side by side. So the path of nescience or ignorance is that which we are not, and that is known as Maya, that which is not. Maya, not that. So we are connecting with our false ego. We're falsely identifying with ourselves as in this particular body, which happens to be male, female, young, old, and we're creating so many issues based around this body, and we're wasting so much time fighting, arguing, trying to establish our point of view. Meanwhile, life is passing us by, and we're forgetting who we really are, which is the spiritual spark, which is giving life to this body. So self-realization means to understand that we have a higher purpose, and we have to utilize this short time we have in this human form of life for the best benefit. Just like, okay, who shall we pick? Jayananda. What was your first job? Correct. Newspaper. Anyone else have a newspaper round when they were young? Or a milk round? And both, I was too greedy. And but were you thinking, that you would stay a newspaper delivery boy for the rest of your life? You were thinking, okay, if I could, even as a newspaper round, I had one round which was, I inherited it from a neighbour who was a good bit older than me. So the shop which used to deliver the newspapers, they had certain areas, and they had determined those areas by by the size, not by so many doors. So this boy Danny, he had a newspaper round which had about half a dozen newspapers. Whereas others had like many dozens of them. So he would do his newspaper delivery in like about 5 minutes, and he'd get paid the same as everyone else. So everybody wanted that round. And somehow or another, he when he was giving it up, he gave it to me. And of course, everyone was quite jealous, and they were trying to like take over in so many different ways. But then even at that, so they were, even though they had a newspaper and they were looking for some improvement, they wanted to do either do less and get more, or do less and get the same. So, and then we leave that newspaper around and we get something else. And we're always looking to improve our lot in this material world. And even if someone comes to the point where they think they're materially satisfied, sometimes people have this view that moderation in everything. So maybe some people may be able to be somewhat satisfied in the material situation, but you cannot remain in it. You can't remain in it forever. We have no choice. How many people, say you take 100 years ago, someone was in a situation they were happy with, but where are they now? They cannot remain happy because they grow old. And then as you grow old, then things start happening with the body that don't get right again. When you're younger, quite often things heal better. As you get older, things don't heal so quick, and sometimes not at all. And then you have to add it to your ailments that you're trying to manage somehow or another. So there's a nice story in this regard. You've probably all heard it, but I'll tell you again anyway, because some of you might not have heard it. So there's this one man who he understood that at the time of death, you're accountable for your actions, but if you atone for them, then you can free yourself from these reactions. So he's thinking, well, I could enjoy life, but if I knew when death was coming, then I could get some time to atone for them and clear the slate so they don't have to get punished in some way. So he thought, let me try to make friends with Yamaraj, Lord of Death. And then when I make friends with him, I'll say, okay, can you do me a favor? And friends usually do each other favors. So so he did. He made friends with Yamaraj. He did some austerities, penances, etc. He did some things to please him, and he got the audience of Yamaraj, and he says, so can you do me one favor? Yamaraj says, yes, what is it? He says, well, you send me notice before my death so that I can prepare. He says, yep, I can do that. You're my friend, no problem, I can do that. So he said, oh, great, thanks. So he went off, enjoying his life, and his life was passing by, and finally he died, and he was in front of Yamaraj, and he says, what happened? I thought you were going to tell me. You didn't tell me, you didn't give me any notice. He says, I did. Your hair went grey, you went bald, your teeth fell out, you got arthritis. I sent you so many notices, but you didn't take them. So, of course, whether this happened or whether it's a story just to illustrate something, the same message is there anyway. And probably he compares this, the soul living in the body as being, we're like a tenant, and we have a contract to stay in this body for a certain period of time. And then when the contract's up, then eviction comes, isn't it? You cannot remain any longer. Eviction is there. And we want to stay in this body because this body is the facility to enjoy ourselves. Through the senses, we enjoy. Through the eyes, we enjoy to see nice things. Through the sense of touch, we touch nice things. We taste, smell, hear. And the mind is known as the sixth sense. It's the center of the mind. The mind is the center of the senses. Those 5 knowledge-acquiring senses. And also, it gives suggestions for the senses how to engage in sense gratification, once again for the attempted gratification, satisfaction of the mind. And because the senses are limited, then we can, for example, someone passes a flower around, and you think, oh, that's a nice flower, and you smell it again and again and again. But after a few smells, then it's no longer seems like the smell is gone, but you pass it on to the next person and they can smell it. So this is indicating that our senses have a capacity. We can only smell so much, taste so much, etc. So there's we have a limitation, and therefore what we do is we go from one sense to another. We're just trying to keep our mind occupied. But chanting Hare Krishna is considered to be the Maha Mantra, or the great deliverer of the mind. So the mind may want to be satisfied by agitating the senses, by engaging them in contact with the sense objects in so many different varieties of ways. And sometimes people, they have is an interesting term that Prabhupada used to use. So sometimes people think they're engaged in some high-class sense gratification. Yes, we're a connoisseur of this 75-year-old cheese, and it stinks like your granddad's socks or something. Or they take some wine from the cellar that's a few hundred years old, and they're thinking, this is this is high class. And then someone else is buying some cheap thing from some bargain basement store, and people are looking down at them. He refers to this as wet stool, dry stool. So if someone's eating dry stool and thinking this is much better than the wet stool that you're eating. So these different categories of material sense gratification are quite insignificant, and they don't satisfy. They're insignificant in the sense that what the soul is capable of enjoying. It's one of those things. It's interesting that sometimes people, they look for respect and they demand respect, but when you demand respect, quite often you get the opposite, isn't it? You ever find that if someone's demanding respect from you, you actually lose respect for them. But someone who's respectful to others, then they attract respect. So the very thing that you're giving and the very thing you're not looking for, you get it in that way. So the same works with devotional service. By giving up the idea that I, me, and mine, I'm first, this is all about me, this is mine, and we put Krishna in center and act for the satisfaction of Vishnu, Yogyavai Vishnu, Yagya Tat Kamano. So if one engages in sacrifices to please Vishnu, then one can be satisfied. As much as watering the root of the tree satisfies the whole tree. So the category of people known as demons here, or asuras. Sura means godly, asura means the opposite. So English means like demigods and demons, but sura and asura is the accurate wording here. So those who are sura, they're godly, or they're inclined towards serving Krishna, Vishnu, and they're inclined towards devotional service to one level or another, gradual elevation or full absorption, whichever their level of advancement may be. And the asuras, they are opposed to recognizing that there's anyone supreme that we're accountable to, or that we're accountable for our own actions. What is that verse? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. So they're thinking, there's only one life, just enjoy it. But what if there isn't only one life? Then it's quite a gamble to take, isn't it? So, and even if there was only one life, it's not that devotees who take to Krishna consciousness are simply just suffering by self by placing so many restrictions upon themselves. They're actually enjoying life to a great degree. So another interesting thing is sometimes people will remark that devotees, that religion is just a crutch, it's just a crutch for the weak. You ever heard that one? But then those who are not interested in God consciousness, then what are their crutches? Everybody needs crutches. It's the nature of the living entity to be attached. We're attached to something or someone. Even sometimes people are attached to being seen as being detached. They say that even a sannyasi can be attached to his own water pot. There was one story there. Was it Lord Chaitanya did it? He, when as a young, in his young years, he switched all the water pots of the Brahmins. Is that right? Or the paraphernalia of the Brahmins. So I think, I can't remember the person that was involved, but there was an instance where some renunciants, so typically a renunciant has a stick and a water pot. That's their only possessions. But if they're not sufficiently renounced, then all their attachment is focused on the one water pot. And if they become really attached to that one water pot. So it's not simply enough to give up externally, to give up possessions. That's only the beginning. But the real renunciation is to give up the false sense of proprietorship, that something is mine. So the Asuric mentality is that the world is there for their enjoyment, and because they don't consider anything beyond this life, then they have no consideration for the destruction which they cause to others and the harm they cause to others in their efforts to enjoy themselves. So here we're seeing that the followers of Hiranyakashipu are systematically destroying civilization with no consideration for the harm to others, the upset they're causing. And we see this is going on even today. This is a typical demoniac thing. People are being made homeless. They're being displaced from their countries simply because someone has a desire to take something from someone else. And it's all based on this one thing called ahankara. Ahankara means false ego. So we have real ego, which is Jivera Swarapahoy, Krishnara Nityadas, Krishnara Tatasta Shakti Veda Veda Prakash. That the Swarup, or the constitutional position of the living entity, is Krishnadas, eternal servant of the Supreme Lord. That is our nature, to serve. Krishnara Tatasta Shakti. So there's many different energies. We have the Bahiranga Shakti, which is the external material energy, the Antaranga Shakti, which is the internal potency, the spiritual potency, that which is never affected by the material energy. And then we have the marginal potency, Tatasta Shakti. Krishnara Tatasta Shakti, Beda Beda Prakash. So the philosophy is Beda Beda, Achintya Beda, Beda Tattva. That truth, that Tattva, is Achintya, it's inconceivable, simultaneous oneness and difference. So we're simultaneously one with the Supreme and different from. And the singer Kavacha, I think it was, or was it Murli Manohar the other day, was making a point that if everyone is one, and if one person gets liberated, then we'd all get liberated. I remember reading about this before I came across Prabhupada's books. I was reading about merging into the oneness and all that, and I thought, okay, good, I'm ready for it. I'm done with this world, let me go. So I just lay on my bed thinking, all right, take me. And I can leave it all behind. Family's just an illusion. It doesn't exist. So I was just really willing to just be merged back in, and then it's like nothing's happening, right? So where am I going wrong? So I tried so many ways to do that, and I just found it wasn't practical. It wasn't practical at all. An interesting example of this, one devotee was doing books in Nottingham. Doing books, by that I mean he was selling Bhagavad Gitas and other Krishna conscious books on the street. And this man who proposed himself to be a yogi of some description and a philosopher, he proposed this philosophy that we're all one. So the devotee wanted to teach him a practical lesson. He says, we're all one. Yeah. He says, so what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours. Yeah. He says, so can I have my wallet? So of course he thought about it for a while, but then he was tested practically. He said, well, it's all one. What's yours is mine. Then it's, your wallet's my wallet. So, and I need some money. Could I have my wallet? So he'd walked right into it. He'd put himself in a position where he'd either have to back out of his philosophy or make good on it. So he pulled his wallet out and they gave it to him. And then he came back later on and he says, actually, I need some money for the bus fare. Could I have something? He says, well, you can go and ask me over there. It's all one anyway. So we can see how impractical it is. But Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva philosophy is practical because we understand that we're simultaneously one with the Supreme Spirit Soul, who we know as Krishna, and we're different because we are minute. He's infinite, and we're infinitesimal. But we're similar in nature in that we're eternal, full of bliss and full of knowledge. But because we buy into the material way of life, then we sell ourselves short and we get something less than satisfying. So the nature of Krishna consciousness is that the more we chant, the more we engage, then the more we Chetodarpana Marjanam, we cleanse the mirror of the mind. The mind becomes our friend when it's cleansed of misconceptions, of our identification. And then we can see the true reflection that I'm spirit soul, I'm nothing to do with this material world, and I'm just temporarily here. And when we have that consciousness, then at the end of this life, then we no longer have to take birth again in this material world. Janma karma chamidavyam evam yovati tatpata tyakvideham punarjanma naitimam eti sorjana. So one who knows the janma and karma, the birth and activities of the Lord, when Krishna comes to the material world, he doesn't come like an ordinary person who's forced to take birth according to the previous karma. He has no duty to perform, as he mentions in Bhagavad Gita, but still, even though he has no duty to perform, then Krishna maintains these worlds out of love for the living entities. So when we understand Krishna's nature to not be subject to the laws of material nature, that in fact he's the lawmaker, he's the origin of all the different spiritual and material worlds, Aham Savasya Prabhavo, of all worlds, both spiritual and material, then Aham Prabha, I am the Lord, I'm the controller, but still Krishna's not attached. He gives so much control to all the living entities so they can do it. He's the most expert at delegating. With the living entity, when we become wealthy or famous or most beautiful or more strong, then our ego gets affected by it. But Krishna, he's Bhagavan, he possesses all opulence in full, but he's not affected by it. So I often think it's a good job Krishna's God, because if it was someone else, we'd probably be in trouble. So these personalities, Hiranyakashipu and all the supporters, then they're motivated by false ego, I mean mine. They want to enjoy without any restriction, without any repercussion, but the laws of nature will not allow it. Just like you may break some material law, some state law, and you might get away with it, but the law of karma is such that you cannot escape it. Either this life or next life, something will come back to you. So whatever we do it to ourselves. Therefore, an intelligent person think twice before they act, because then they understand for their own well-being. Then it's good to understand what should be done and what should not be done. What is permitted action, what is forbidden action. And not just rules of do's and don'ts, but actually what's the purpose behind these rules? What we're doing it for? If it's just simply a bunch of rules, then we just become rebellious. Like, why shall I follow all these rules? But there's a purpose behind it, which is prema, pumarta, mahan, to develop love of God. And that begins from atato brahma jigyasa, that we understand that we have this human form of life. We have the ability to inquire of knowledge after knowledge of the self, and that culminates in the highest level of pure love of God. So we kind of strayed a bit from the purport, but it's Krishna conscious anyway. So the cutting of trees generally prohibited. So we see that actually the civilized society, one aspect of their social security was to plant many fruit trees so that people would have food to take. And I've seen this also. My wife's from South Africa, and I was there some years ago, and people would be climbing the trees to take the mangoes, the jackfruits, etc., and they'd be selling them at the side of the road. But then as people become more greedy, then someone starts taking the fruits before they're ripe. They want to get there before someone else gets there, and they start making a business of it. And before you know it, nobody's getting any ripe jackfruit, nobody's getting any ripe mangoes. So greed takes over, and then this just becomes another example of uncontrolled or selfish, fulfilling selfish desires, not considering the good of the whole. But digging wells and planting fruit trees, this was considered to be pious activities by any government. But we don't see that in today's government. What do? They simply just tax the citizens. And even when you've been taxed, whatever you've got left, you spend it, no tax that. No tax upon your tax. And then when you're dead, they'll take the tax off you as well, right? What was it? The Beatles had a song called The Taxman, right? Something to do with the pennies on your eyes, because they had this thing when people died, to keep their eyes shut, they used to put, the old pennies were about that size, which is equivalent of a half penny, which is not even any longer in circulation. So they used to put these big pennies on your eyes to keep your eyes shut, so that when rigor mortis took place, then your eyes would be left shut. So if there's a viewing of the coffin, then people aren't lying there with their eyes open. And then he says, be careful, because the taxman will take even the pennies from your eyes when you're dead. So this is foretold in the Bhagavatam. I can't remember if it was 11th or 12th canto, that in this age of Kali, the age of quarrel and hypocrisy, that the leaders are nothing more than rogues and thieves, and they will tax us to the point where the people just head for the hills. But you can't even head for the hills, because to live in the hills, you need to have some land, you need to have a house, you need to work all your life in the big city to even try to get a little cottage in the hills to retire to. So even that is so difficult. But we can retire to a higher understanding. So even if we're in the big cities or we're in the villages, whatever, then with a higher understanding, then we can become liberated from that entanglement and the effects of that entangling material world. So I'll just stop there. Anyone get any questions or comments? Okay, so we'll just stop there. It's Ganga Govinda Ki, Srila Prabhupada Ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki, Nitai Gaur Premanande Haribo. Gaura Bhakta Ki.